Alex had always been the adventurous type, eager to explore the world and soak up as many experiences as possible. His friends often joked that he had a magnet for trouble, but that never stopped him from chasing the next thrill. This time, his wanderlust brought him to London, a city steeped in history and adorned with an unending array of cultural gems. From the bustling streets of Camden Market to the serene expanses of Hyde Park, Alex's first few days were a blur of excitement and exploration. As he walked through the historic heart of the city, Alex's attention was captured by the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. He had seen it countless times in movies and photos, but standing before it, he felt a wave of awe mixed with a mischievous spark that was all too familiar. The palace guards, known for their iconic red uniforms and unwavering discipline, stood like statues at their posts. Alex had heard about the strict protocol these guards followed, how they remained impassive no matter the provocation. With his smartphone ready, Alex thought it would be hilarious to test the guards' famed stoicism. "It's just a bit of water," he reasoned, imagining the laughs it would get online. He didn't mean any harm. It was all in good fun, or so he thought. As he approached the nearest guard, a few tourists around him began to sense something amiss. They watched, some with amused curiosity, others with a hint of concern. The moment Alex uncapped his water bottle and splashed a small stream onto the stoic guard's shoe, the air around him thickened. The guard's expression didn't change, not even a flinch, but the crowd gasped. In that instant, Alex realized that he might have misjudged the situation. The fun and games atmosphere he imagined quickly dissolved as two security officers moved through the crowd toward him. Their faces were stern, and their intent was clear. Alex's heart raced as he tried to explain, but the words tumbled out all wrong. "It was just a joke," he stammered, his usual confidence deflated by the seriousness of the officer's approach. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a mix of disapproval and disbelief at the spectacle unfolding before them. In mere moments, Alex went from feeling like a playful tourist to a misguided prankster facing real consequences. As the officers escorted him away from the crowd, Alex's adventurous spirit was overshadowed by a sinking feeling of regret. The lesson that was beginning to dawn on him was harsh but clear. Some boundaries were not meant to be tested, especially not in a city that prided itself on tradition and respect. As Alex was escorted away from the scene by the security officers, his initial embarrassment quickly turned into a cocktail of anxiety and regret. The crisp air that had earlier filled him with excitement now seemed to press down on him with a weight of realization about the gravity of his actions. He glanced back to see the guard he had splashed with water, perfectly composed, still standing guard as if nothing had happened. This image deepened Alex's shame, contrasting sharply with the turmoil he felt inside. Inside a small security office, the atmosphere was stark and professional. The officers were firm but fair as they explained the severity of disrespecting the royal guards, an act considered highly offensive in this historically rich context. Alex sat on a cold metal chair, his hands fidgeting nervously as he listened. He learned that the royal guards were not just a tourist attraction, but a symbol of national pride and heritage. Each guard was trained to withstand all sorts of challenges without breaking their duty, and any interference with their role was taken seriously. As the officers filled out their reports, Alex's mind raced. He thought about how a simple joke, intended to amuse, could lead to such a dramatic escalation. He tried to argue his case, stressing that there was no ill intent behind his actions. "I honestly thought it would be funny, just a light moment." Alex tried to explain, hoping for some understanding. However, the officers were unmoved, emphasizing the importance of respecting cultural norms and the responsibilities of visitors to adhere to them. Feeling the weight of his mistake, Alex was informed that he would need to appear in a local magistrate court to officially address the incident. The prospect of facing legal action in a foreign country was daunting. The thought of calling his family to explain what had happened filled him with dread. He imagined their disappointment and worry, which added to his growing distress. As he was processed for the minor offense and given a court date, Alex sat quietly, reflecting on his actions. The room was filled with the sound of typing and the occasional crackle of a walkie-talkie. Outside, the city continued its hustle and bustle, oblivious to the small drama unfolding within the security office walls. This experience was shaping up to be a stark reminder for Alex that not all cultural norms are universal, and what might be considered harmless fun in one place could be seen as a serious disrespect in another. As he was released with instructions to appear in court, Alex stepped back out into the city, his view of it irrevocably changed. The remainder of his trip would now be shadowed by this looming court appearance, a constant reminder of his thoughtless action. Alex had never imagined that a simple joke would land him in such a serious situation. As he stepped out of the security office, the lively streets of London now felt different. The city, which had earlier seemed exciting and full of possibilities, now felt overwhelming. He looked around at the crowds of tourists and locals going about their day, completely unaware of the trouble he was in. His heart pounded with the weight of what was ahead. He had to appear in court. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out. A message from his best friend back home flashed on the screen. "How's London? Having fun?" Alex let out a deep sigh. Just a few hours ago, he was, but now. He typed back a short reply. "Long story. Not as fun as I thought." He couldn't bring himself to explain the full situation just yet. With a court date set, he knew he needed help. He quickly searched online and found a local lawyer who specialized in cases involving tourists. After a short phone call, he arranged to meet the lawyer in a small cafe near Trafalgar Square. He walked through the streets with a heavy heart, his usual excitement for exploring now buried under his growing anxiety. At the cafe, the lawyer, a middle-aged man named Mr. Collins, greeted him with a firm handshake and a calm expression. "I've handled many cases like yours," he assured Alex as they sat down. "You're not the first tourist to underestimate the importance of the Royal Guards." Alex shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean any harm," he said. "I just thought it would be a funny moment for social media. I never expected it to turn into a legal issue." Mr. Collins nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "That's the problem with jokes like these. The Royal Guards are not just for show. They represent a long-standing tradition, and any disrespect is taken very seriously." He leaned forward. "But don't worry. Since you didn't cause harm and you're showing remorse, there's a good chance you won't face severe punishment. However, we need to make sure the court understands that you've learned from this." Hearing this gave Alex a small sense of relief, but he still felt uneasy. "What do you think will happen?" he asked. Mr. Collins sighed. "Best case, a fine and a formal apology. Worst case, you could be banned from returning to the UK for a while, depending on how the judge sees it." Alex swallowed hard. The idea of being banned from a country over a joke seemed unreal. He thought about all the places he still wanted to visit: Big Ben, the Tower of London, the British Museum. He had barely scratched the surface of this historic city, and now he might not even get the chance. As they discussed the case further, Mr. Collins advised him on how to behave in court. "Be respectful, take responsibility, and don't make excuses," he warned. "Judges appreciate honesty, but they won't tolerate someone who acts like they don't care." Alex nodded, feeling the seriousness of his situation sink in even deeper. His carefree trip had taken a sharp turn, and now all he could do was hope that he could fix the mess he had made. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than Alex expected. He barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of what could happen. The idea of standing before a judge in a foreign country made his stomach twist with nerves. He had always been someone who loved adventure, but this was not the kind of experience he had hoped for. Dressed in a simple but neat outfit, Alex walked into the courthouse with Mr. Collins by his side. The building was imposing, its tall ceilings and polished floors adding to the weight of the moment. As they waited for his case to be called, Alex observed the other people around him. Some looked calm, others nervous, and a few downright terrified. He wondered how many of them were here for something as foolish as what he had done. Mr. Collins leaned in and whispered, "Stay calm. Be respectful. Answer only what's asked." Alex nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He had never been in a courtroom before, and now he was about to stand before a judge because of a prank he barely thought twice about. Finally, his name was called. His heart pounded as he stood up and walked to the front. The judge, a serious-looking woman with sharp eyes, glanced at the file in front of her before looking at Alex. "You are charged with public misconduct involving a member of the Royal Guard. How do you plead?" Alex swallowed. "Guilty, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady but nervous. The judge studied him for a moment. "Mr. Collins has explained the details of your case. I understand you claim this was a joke." Alex hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, Your Honor. But I now understand that it was wrong. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I realize now that my actions were irresponsible, and I deeply regret them." The judge tapped her pen against the desk. "The Royal Guards are not a tourist attraction for amusement. They represent our nation's history and honor. Many tourists come and try to provoke them, thinking it is harmless. But it is not. You disrupted their duty." Alex nodded quickly. "I understand that now, and I'm truly sorry." The judge glanced at Mr. Collins, then back at Alex. "You are fortunate that this is your first offense and that no harm was caused. However, we must ensure that such behavior is not repeated by others who might think they can act carelessly." Alex felt his pulse quicken. Was she about to ban him from the country? Fine him a huge amount? The uncertainty made his chest tighten. After a pause, the judge continued, "You will be required to pay a fine, and you must issue a formal written apology. If you comply, no further action will be taken." Relief flooded through Alex. He could handle that. It was a fair punishment. He thanked the judge sincerely before stepping away, feeling lighter but also humbled. As he walked out of the courtroom, he knew one thing for sure. This was a lesson he would never forget. As Alex stepped out of the courtroom, he let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The weight of uncertainty that had been pressing down on him for days finally lifted, though not entirely. He had avoided serious trouble, but he still had to face the consequences of his actions. A fine and a formal apology. Both were manageable, but the experience had shaken him deeply. Mr. Collins gave him a small nod. "You handled yourself well in there," he said as they walked toward the exit. "The judge could see that you were genuinely sorry. That made all the difference." Alex nodded, still absorbing everything that had happened. "I guess I never thought about how much respect the guards deserve," he admitted. "To me, it was just a joke, but to them, it was an insult." Mr. Collins smiled slightly. "You're not the first tourist to learn this lesson the hard way, but what matters is that you did learn." Outside, the crisp London air felt fresher than before. It was as if stepping out of that building allowed him to breathe freely again. But there was still one thing left to do: the apology letter. It wasn't just about writing some words on a piece of paper. It was about truly acknowledging his mistake. Back at his hotel, Alex sat down at the small desk by the window and stared at a blank sheet of paper. He had never written an apology letter before, at least not one that actually mattered. This wasn't just about making things right legally. It was about showing real regret. He tapped the pen against his chin, thinking back to the moment he poured the water. He had been so focused on making a funny memory that he hadn't considered how disrespectful it was. He had taken something sacred and treated it like a joke. Now, he needed to own up to that. Slowly, he began to write. "To the Royal Guard whom I disrespected, and to the people of the United Kingdom. I sincerely apologize for my actions. What I saw as a harmless joke was, in reality, a sign of disrespect toward a tradition that has stood for centuries. I regret not thinking before I acted, and I now understand the significance of the role you play and the discipline it requires. I take full responsibility for my mistake, and I assure you that I have learned a valuable lesson. I will carry this experience with me as a reminder to respect the cultures and customs of every place I visit. Again, I am truly sorry." When he finished, Alex read the letter over carefully. It was simple, but it was honest. He folded the paper neatly and placed it in an envelope, feeling a sense of closure. As he prepared to deliver the letter, he realized something surprising. This experience, as stressful as it had made him a better traveler. From now on, he would be more mindful, more respectful, and most importantly, he would never again mistake a moment of amusement for an excuse to ignore another culture's values. Alex woke up the next morning with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in days. The relief of the court hearing was still fresh in his mind, but today was different. He had to do what was required of him to put this chapter behind him. Deliver the apology letter. It wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about respecting the culture and traditions he had so thoughtlessly ignored. After a quick breakfast, he set out to the palace where he had made his mistake. He felt a twinge of discomfort as he approached the area, knowing the guards would be standing exactly where they had been when he poured water on one of them. This time, however, he looked at them differently. Rather than seeing them as just a part of the tourist attraction, he recognized the immense duty they carried. The stillness, the focus in their eyes. It wasn't just a job, it was an honor, and Alex had disrespected that. As he approached the guard post, Alex hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure if he should hand the letter directly to the guards or to one of the nearby officers. After all, this apology was about the guards themselves, but it was also about respecting the law and the tradition they represented. He took a deep breath and approached one of the officers standing nearby. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, turned his gaze toward Alex as he approached. "Can I help you, sir?" the officer asked, his voice calm but professional. I'm here to deliver an apology," Alex said, holding the envelope in his hand. "I made a mistake, and I want to make things right." The officer looked at him curiously for a moment before nodding. "I understand. It takes a lot to come back and admit when you've made a misstep. Let me take this for you, and I'll make sure it gets to the right people." Alex handed over the envelope, his heart still heavy but lighter than before. As the officer walked away, Alex couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The hardest part was over. All he could do now was wait for the consequences to unfold. Alex walked around the area for a while longer, reflecting on everything that had happened. The experience had been a wake-up call. He thought back to his life before the prank, always rushing from one thing to the next, barely stopping to understand the place he was in or the people around him. His time in London had forced him to slow down and reconsider his approach to the world. He realized that this lesson, though harsh, had been valuable. It wasn't just about respecting royal guards. It was about respecting the history, the culture, and the values that came with every place he visited. There were always deeper meanings behind things, and it was up to him to learn those meanings rather than approach the world with careless humor. As the day went on, Alex felt lighter, more at peace with himself. He knew that his apology wouldn't erase the mistake, but it was the right step in the process of understanding. What mattered now was how he would continue forward, carrying the lessons he'd learned and making sure he would never make the same mistake again. The next few days felt like a slow waiting game for Alex. He went about his daily routine in London, but nothing felt quite the same. The energy he had once felt for exploring new places was tempered by the lingering thoughts of his court case. Even though the judge had been lenient, the weight of his mistake still sat heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was a reminder of the embarrassment he had caused. As the days passed, he began to receive messages from friends back home. They had heard about his little mishap, and while they expressed concern, there was also an underlying sense of amusement. They didn't fully understand the seriousness of the situation, which made Alex feel even more isolated. It wasn't the kind of adventure he had planned, and it certainly wasn't something to joke about. He had learned that some things, especially those tied to history and culture, were not to be taken lightly. One afternoon, Alex received an unexpected email. It was from the office of the Royal Guard. He had no idea what to expect, but his heart skipped a beat as he clicked it open. The letter was brief but formal, thanking him for his apology and acknowledging the sincerity of his words. They appreciated his respect for the traditions and wished him well on his travels. The letter was signed by a senior officer, and it made Alex feel both relieved and grateful. Although the letter didn't erase the past, it provided the closure he needed. For the first time in days, Alex felt a genuine sense of peace. He had taken responsibility for his actions, and in return, the people he had offended had extended their understanding. The apology had been a success, and the consequences were now behind him. With this chapter finally closed, Alex decided to make the most of the rest of his trip. He visited a few more iconic landmarks, but this time, he did so with a deeper sense of respect for the places and people he encountered. Every street, every building, and every tradition felt more meaningful than it had before. He understood now that travel wasn't just about ticking off a list of things to see. It was about understanding the world in a deeper way, respecting its history, and connecting with its people. The rest of his time in London passed without incident. He felt lighter, more in tune with the city and its rhythms. He didn't rush through the crowds anymore, nor did he seek out the attention of strangers. Instead, he quietly observed, appreciating the beauty and history that surrounded him. As he packed his bags and prepared to leave, Alex looked out one last time at Buckingham Palace, the site of his mishap. The guards stood tall and still, just as they always had, but now he saw them with a newfound respect. They were not just figures to take photos with or laugh at. They were the guardians of a tradition that had been centuries in the making. And in his heart, Alex knew he had learned a lesson he would carry with him forever. As Alex boarded the plane to head back home, he leaned back in his seat, his thoughts drifting back to everything that had happened. The excitement he had felt when he first arrived in London now seemed so distant. It had been replaced by a quiet sense of reflection and growth. This trip, which had started with the usual carefree adventure, had turned into something far more significant. He had learned a lesson about respect, culture, and the importance of thinking before acting. The flight was long, and Alex had plenty of time to think. His mind often wandered back to the Royal Guards. He couldn't help but think about how something as small as a prank could turn into such a big deal. He had never expected that his actions, which he had seen as harmless, could affect something so important to others. But in a way, it was this realization that had changed him. He had come to see the world not just as a place to visit and take pictures, but as a place to understand and respect. Back home, Alex's friends were eager to hear about his trip. They wanted to know all the fun details, the stories of sightseeing and adventures. But Alex wasn't in the mood to talk about the usual tourist activities. Instead, he found himself sharing the story of his mistake, the joke that had gone too far, and the lessons it had taught him. At first, his friends laughed, not fully grasping the gravity of what had happened. But as Alex explained what he had learned, they started to understand. "Sounds like you got quite the lesson out of it," one of his friends said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I guess you'll think twice before messing with Royal Guards next time." "Huh?" Alex chuckled, but it was a thoughtful laugh. "Definitely. But more than that, I'll think twice about the things I do without understanding the full picture. There's always more to things than what meets the eye." His friends didn't have much to say after that, but Alex knew they were processing his words. He wasn't trying to be preachy or overly serious. He was just sharing the growth he had experienced, the way the incident had changed his perspective. As the weeks went by, Alex's life slowly returned to normal. He went back to his routine, but something had shifted inside him. When he traveled again, he did so with more awareness, more consideration for the places he visited and the people he encountered. He found himself taking time to learn about the history behind the landmarks, to listen to the stories of the locals, and to understand the significance of the cultures he was surrounded by. The prank that had once seemed like a harmless joke now seemed like a distant memory. Alex had come to realize that some mistakes were necessary for growth. He had been embarrassed, yes, but he had also learned something invaluable, and that, in the end, was what mattered most. Looking back, Alex could see that his trip to London wasn't just about the tourist spots or the fun he had. It was about the lessons he had learned along the way. And while he may have stumbled, he had emerged from it wiser, more respectful, and far more appreciative of the world around him. He knew that every journey, whether a physical one to a new place or an inner one, would bring its own challenges, but it was how he handled them that would define his future adventures.